6 children died trying to reach these shores. You know, I think we all agree, every person in Britain, that a legitimate asylum seeker should be granted a home in this country. We know everybody does. You know, if you've worked in government or just been aware of it, nobody puts their kids on the water unless the water's safer than the land. But what's happening today is a very big question about what deterrent amounts to. And the government are about to announce what we need to do is to stop the gangs. Many people out there will be saying, well, that's one thing, but is that a real deterrent when it takes 40 weeks, for instance, for your claim to be dealt with? You'll get benefits when you arrive, and even when your claim isn't dealt with, you're going to disappear into society, never to be seen again. Do you think, having heard what you've heard this morning, that this is a real deterrent and it's going to stop the tragedies that we've seen this week and too many other weeks, Salma?
Well, when I worked in the Home Office, we lived in fear of exactly this story, is that we would get a phone call and we would be told that actually children have died in the Channel. And so I absolutely understand the pressure and the fresh focus that this will bring onto the issue. In terms of deterrence, I think you're absolutely right to say that whatever's happened so far is not working. And there has always been an idea that you could have an office in France, somewhere, whether it's in Paris or whether it's on the shores, that allows for processing so that at least people aren't taking unnecessary risks. Now, people have always said to me, it doesn't matter if you're rejected from that process, you might still try and get on a boat. But it's not the only thing that you can do. I think that has to be part of a much bigger picture of how we deal with it. So it's not necessarily about just a deterrence, you know, which is a Rwanda scheme, which is defined as third country processing. It is actually about making sure that those people who do have legitimate recourse to asylum or immigration status in the UK are doing so. Because there might be some people who are travelling by boat who don't know that they have legal redress or recourse to be here. So I have always been in favour of having some sort of processing in France, but I recognise that that still could be a pull factor for a lot of people, and I think that has always been the criticism of it.
Why would there be resistance to the idea of an office in France? Is it because French don't really want it?
No, I think it's because there's a lot of people that think that if you say that there's a way to process, it would attract more people to do that. It's not based on any particular numerical evidence, but it is around what that draw could be to make that simpler. And the whole idea of the hostile environment was to make it harder for people to be able to be processed.
There's certainly a perception, isn't there, Caroline, that lingers, whether rightly or wrongly, that if people come here, they will be given a hotel, they'll be given some safety, regardless of what drives them to come to the UK. And obviously, there's all sorts of issues with backlog in processing. But, you know, what is the reality? Do people get cover? Do people get benefits? What is the situation? Because if we understood the reality of that, wouldn't it make it a lot clearer to have a deterrent not to come or to address why there isn't a deterrent?
Well, someone seeking asylum doesn't necessarily automatically get benefits. They're not of the same rules that apply to people who are here and, you know, paid in, but also are, you know, citizens of this country.
Yeah.
They don't get the same arrangements of that. But, however, there is a cost. We know billions of pounds is spent each year on just accommodation for the large numbers of people who are coming here, but are already here, who, as Rob said, their claims haven't actually been processed. I was the Home Office Minister for tackling organised crime in government. Organised crime, it's like they are criminal entrepreneurs.
Right.
If only they could tap their entrepreneurial brains into doing something worthwhile, it would be great.
Well, because they're so clever.
Because they will all, these people, everyone, everything is a commodity. Whether we're talking about people, whether we're talking about drugs, whether we're talking about counterfeit goods, and they run sophisticated corporate networks with supply chains in it, which are incredibly difficult to smash. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do something, because actually one of the reasons why in more recent years it's the channel crosses that become so evident is because coming on a lorry and in other means or via air was shut down. But I do agree with Salma, there has to be, I do think you have to tackle the gangs through Interpol, Europol and other agencies. But it is also looking at how we process as well. But it is terrible what has happened in the last week. It's always terrible. But part of the challenge is some of the people getting in those boats are tempted because, you know, the gangs aren't telling them it's going to be a rough ride on the channel.
Right.
They are telling them you're going to get this when you get to the UK. I think English language is a magnet as well, because English is an international language, it's easier. But for some of the people, actually, they have sought asylum in other European countries and they have been turned down. So they're always looking for another route through. It is a problem that has to be dealt with on the crime front. It's a problem about resourcing, getting the claims through, but it's also about trying to look internationally as well as a country on our own, how we tackle the numbers of people who are trying to seek asylum around the world.
Salma, one of the deterrents that Rishi Sunak and the last government was in favour of in stopping the boats, their slogan, was Rwanda. And never actually happened, scrapped by the new government. And now we read on the front page of the Daily Mail that Germany is looking into using it, which, of course, the UK's already spent 380 million on those facilities.
They put their towels on our deck chairs.
They put the towels on our deck chairs. I mean, you know, we've spent the money, it's set up, it's been scrapped. Germany might come in and make use of it. People are going to be beyond furious, aren't they?
I think they will be beyond furious. I think that when the new government came in, you know, the sort of toxicity around the Rwanda scheme and third-party processing of migrants was such that I think the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary made a decision because it was getting clogged up in the...
Say third-party processing. I think most people's impression of Rwanda was that they would be processed here or indeed not processed here because of the backlog and be sent to Rwanda. How is that the processing in another country?
So it's the terminology that I use about the fact that it's removed outside of your own shores or somewhere that they came from originally.
OK, so we'd still process them here. It wouldn't get around that. But it's just where that people would be sent.
It's where they would go. So it's a third party coming into the dynamic of the two nations that you would usually deal with. But this is not, the concept of it is not new, you know, that you had offshore processing in Australia. Previously. And
Blair was suggesting putting it on the island of Mull, I think, on one occasion, maybe under your watch, correct? You laugh.
Yeah, that didn't come into my inbox, but yeah, you're right. I think that it has been something, and I think papers today are about offshoring prisoners as well to other countries
to
as well.
Estonia, because they have such a low crime rate. Their prisons aren't full, and ours are dangerously full. If you read some reports.
Can we just focus on the fact that it's not just us? Because, you know, when Caroline's talking about the criminal gangs, this is something that is actually affecting the whole of Europe, affecting a lot of Western countries that are seen as much more attractive than a lot of places that people are coming from. And this is going to get worse. You look at things, you just had, you know, a report about climate change, you know, and conflict. Those two factors are creating instability across the world. And actually, that migration pattern, that movement is getting, you know, much more difficult. And so this is going to happen to a lot of places, and we are going to face that pressure. And so even if we just talk about the deterrent to stop people, you know, coming across the channel, it doesn't deal with the bigger issue.
I think part of I mean, for me, look, you're right, Rob. Actually, it's not just Conservative governments who have looked at this issue around offshoring in terms of asylum seekers and others and what have you. But what is I find so limiting in the discussion is if there's one magic tool that is going to do this. Obviously, there has to be, when people are claiming asylum and they're being processed, we need to find a way they're going to have to be accommodated. But fundamental in this is we have a broken immigration system. We've had 14 years of a Conservative government coming up with all sorts of trite sort of phrases. The fact is, there's not enough staff. We don't process as quickly as we should. People end up disappearing sometimes when they come in. And even people who come in legally into the country who overstay, we don't really necessarily know where they are. So it's so much bigger than Rwanda. And, you know, let's see what the Germans do. I'm sure Keir Starmer probably isn't very happy that he had a meeting with the Germans just the other week. I don't know if this came up in the conversation. But the truth is, it is a complicated situation. And actually what I've always felt, you know, very strongly about as an MP too, is there are people who've got absolutely legitimate claims to claim asylum. There are others who are just looking for a better life. And I understand that, but that's not asylum. And so we have people who are trapped in the system, who really should have their processed claims. They should be given refugee status.
But to our viewers on here, that they're not trapped in the system, they're illegal. Nobody has any problem, our viewers, saying, look, if you are seeking asylum legitimately, come. But the message has to be, don't come. We talk about supply and demand. The supply is Britain is a place which welcomes you, or there's not a sufficiently funded justice system that's going to see you off. And while we're talking about the justice system, what matters to clear the backlog is money. And we've got a significant problem in the courts. As you know, they're releasing prisoners, some dangerous prisoners, by the way, early, unless you're rioting or if you're putting out problematic tweets. Again, something that exercises our views. People across Britain, 2-3 year sentences for rioting. Now, that's a conversation for another day. But it's a fascinating thing, isn't it, that we're now suggesting we don't have enough money to put people in prison who deserve to be there, so we're thinking of sending them to Estonia. When I read that this morning, I suspect many of our viewers felt the same way. I thought there was a misprint on the autocue.
Yeah, I find it totally bizarre. I mean, that sort of breaks the whole sentiment of what a justice system is actually about. And also the idea that you can
Why does it break it? Because many people say you've committed a crime, go to prison. If our prisons are full because they're underfunded and we haven't got the money, send them anywhere. Get them off the streets.
Because if you're a citizen here, then the justice system here should be applicable.
Well,
I absolutely do not believe that you can just find a poorer country that you can outsource some of your problems to in such a systematic way.
Norway has been doing this to the Netherlands for some time, and they've been renting spaces and cells. But I think, I mean, look at the discussion about Grenfell this week and the fact that the families are saying that they're not going to see charges brought forward probably until the end, at the end of this decade. I think what we've got here is a justice system that is pretty broken, actually, in terms of people getting justice. I think during the riots, what people saw was actually, resources put in, and we are having courts sitting at all times of the day.
But hold on,
we were getting due process. And I think,
what about Rob's point?
Out of that, people will think, well, if we can do that then, why can't we do it? And it is money. It has been pared back. We haven't built the prisons we should have built. We haven't actually funded the justice system in the way we can to make sure that justice is seen and provided for. And that is a real problem, because actually part of a good democracy is obviously confidence in the system.
Already people are flooding in comments on both the stories, immigration and also prisoners. Jess says, why aren't prisoners who are to be deported at the end of their sentence just deported with immediate effect to where they came from? Surely deporting foreign prisoners would ease the pressure. £60 million spent to house people that shouldn't even be in this country at RAF Scampton. Why can't we put our prisoners there? People see big sums, see big projects being scrapped, big ideas being found to not be such big ideas, and think, I've got a simple solution. Why don't we keep this simpler?
Well, with foreign national offenders, FNOs, there is a process, and historically has been a very efficient process for deportation.
What's gone wrong under the last government then? I know,
it has always been consistent, and the consistent issue has always been legal recourse for FNOs who maybe have family in the UK, and so there is a friction in terms of the legal process and legal redress in some instances. But FNOs do have they do have a tendency to have to be deported.
What's an FNO? Sorry, just
foreign national offender.
Okay.
And I mean, it is if they've got family ties here already. But sometimes countries don't want to take them back. I mean, that's the truth of it. Countries just don't want to take them back. And I know from my own time
people would say, should that be our problem?
The problem is, if they won't take them back in the country of origin, then there's a difficulty. And also the other thing is, every time through the justice system, people are put on a plane to be deported. There are strong views on both sides of this debate to stop the plane going.
Well, it's not just strong views. James on X, this sounds familiar to the Rwanda plan. It won't happen. And you've just touched on something, the legal system. And we all know we're signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, amongst other things that I can foresee my colleagues arguing if somebody was sent to Estonia, is that that's a breach of your Article 8 rights. You're not in reaching distance of your family, so forget about it. Article 3, cruel and unusual treatment. You name it. it was the lawyers, fundamentally, that went to the courts and the judges that stopped the Rwanda plan happening, despite there being a will in Parliament. What's the answer to that? Carolyn, is it time,
I think,
to perhaps withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights?
Well, I don't think it is, because actually we know that there are other European countries in the EU who are already, for example, looking for spaces in Netherlands and Estonia and elsewhere to put some of their prisoners because they haven't got space. So there's part of the question is if they can do it, and these are safe countries who are signed up to the convention, they abide by all sorts of rules, even beyond that, they are doing this. Now, there's a debate about whether this is a really good idea. I understand in an Estonian prison it costs something like between £10,000 and £20,000 a year for each prisoner. Here it's 50,000 a year. So maybe there's something to say. But I do think part of balancing these rights is balancing also the rights of that individual, but also actually the rights of the community and their needs as well in all of this. And sometimes I think that, quite rightly, the public think the balance isn't right.
Well, one of the things that's already exercising people this morning, lots and lots of messages on it, and something that we've been talking about all week here on Good Morning Britain, is winter fuel payments and the loss of that £300 for pensioners other than the very poorest and all the issues surround it. Daily Express front page, we're not greedy. Britain's elderly will do a deal on fuel support. A compromise deal, potentially. Carolyn, what would that look like?
There's something like, isn't it, 10.5 million pensioners who get the winter fuel payment. I don't think it's very well targeted. I don't think a lot of those pensioners need it. But there are people, not just those who are eligible to pension credit, and that is a massive issue. There are, nearly 1 million people out there who should be getting it and don't. And I think maybe the 200 questions on the questionnaire probably doesn't help. But above that threshold as well, there are some pensioners, both in couples and living on their own, who, are not well off, find it really difficult. I think that government should look at some different options. For example, they could extend the warm homes discount. Others have talked, Martin Lewis talked about maybe look at council tax. But there clearly is something about, and some time here as well for the Chancellor to reflect on the impacts of this. Because
so
I don't
much
think
like Ed Balls, who was on his podcast the other day, I think it's fair to say that you don't think this is a very good idea, taking £300 fuel support payments off 10 million pensioners. You don't think it's a good idea or good politics?
I think it should be targeted, and I don't think it necessarily has been as thought through as it might be about the impact, and that's what's really important here. Age UK have said there's around 2 million pensioners they feel the government should look at in supporting continuance of the winter fuel payment, and I think that's, that's probably about the right sum. But we've got a bit of time, and hopefully the government will think
itching
about
to
it.
get in there.
No, this is not good politics, because I tell you what I dislike about this is that
the Tories were advocating it a year ago.
We've always had. No, I'm not being party political here. I'm talking about pensioners who are going to face real difficulty and challenges, especially when costs are going up.
But not all 10 million.
No, but you're saying this is the point I want to make. We've gotten into this idea that, there's a generation that's above us all that have done so much better because they've benefited from house price inflation, or they've had all these other benefits, and somehow, there's a generation underneath us and younger that don't have the same kind of recourse to the same benefits that they've had. And that has allowed for this kind of policy to take place, which is kind of like, we can just take things away from old people because they've had it so good for such a long time. And that actually really annoys me, because I've got friends who are carers for their partners who've had their winter fuel payment taken away. And there's nowhere, even in that 200 question questionnaire, where somebody's saying, well, how much are you taking off the care system? And we've just taken your winter fuel payment away from you. It doesn't...
Well, they haven't taken the winter fuel payment away at the moment, have they?
But they're going to.
Yeah,
but that's irrelevant. That is what they're facing. That is the sort of anxiety at the end of it.
Salma, there are lots of different support for pension, different rates. The triple block is something that is really important, particularly for those who are only on the state pension. But I don't think most people in the country think that actually it's particularly well targeted to have every single pensioner of a certain age have a winter fuel payment. And this has been debated in the past.
Isn't it argued that it's much more expensive to try and target it because the system isn't there? You don't believe that?
I don't think that. I think that actually what we should be asking, there is so much information on pensioners. Why on earth aren't government departments joining the dots? They could expand the warm homes discount, which already exists, and some pensioners get that. So I think there is a way through this. But I think you're right in one sense. Probably the government came in, the Treasury came out with a list of things saying, here, you can do this. And there was one, an untargeted payment. But I think, you know, there is time now before the budget to think about those 2 million, I think, pensioners who particularly... And I say this because I work on fuel poverty. And beyond pensioners, one of the biggest groups of households that are in fuel poverty are parents with children. And so it is not just pensioners that face fuel poverty.
Right.
No. Shall we just jump across the pond now and take a look at life in American politics? Because US Vice President Kamala Harris will come face-to-face with former President Donald Trump on Tuesday for the first TV debate between the two since they've both been presidential nominees.
Yeah, an exclusive polling for Good Morning Britain has found that half of voters in America believe Donald Trump is wrong to suggest that his opponent was chosen as Joe Biden's replacement because she's a woman of colour. The findings by Savanta also revealed that 3/4 of voters say race won't influence how they'll vote. Now, here's Noel Phillips. Have a listen.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
That was the moment that dramatically changed the dynamics of this year's presidential race. No longer was it two white men born in the 1940s facing off against each other. Since replacing Joe Biden, Kamala Harris has been attacked by Donald Trump, who has gone as far as suggesting that she only became the nominee because of her Jamaican and Indian background.
She was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black.
In an exclusive poll shared with this program, half of registered voters in America say the former president is wrong to imply the 59-year-old's rise to the top of the ticket is because she is black. But 6 in 10 Republicans say they support him in his attack on the vice president. Hollywood director Rob Reiner, known for films like When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men, recently spoke to us at the Democratic National Convention about the issue.
There is a certain movement that, like I say, has been around for a long, long time in America. It's racist, it's misogynistic, and it wants America to be a white Christian nation.
Trump has a long history of insulting his opponents, but those close to him insist he does not have a problem with race or gender.
Donald Trump did more for the blacks than any president ever. You know that.
Does he have a problem with people
first step back? No, he helps them. He has a problem with nobody. He's the most unprejudiced guy I've ever met in my life, ever.
With just 60 days to go until Election Day, the former president is said to be confident he will win. But actor Sean Astin, who is campaigning for Harris, says the country is ready for a new chapter.
It's way, way beyond time that this country have a female head of state.
Trump and Harris are now just days away from their first TV debate, which will be a huge test that could ultimately decide which of them end up inside this famous house. Noel Phillips, Good Morning Britain.
So before we come back to Caroline and Salma for more on the presidential race, you can watch the latest episode of our online series, Battle for America, which is available now on Good Morning Britain on the YouTube page. As you listen to that, Caroline, what do you make of it?
What I make of it is there's a race on. And the fact that Trump is coming out with these sort of statements, I mean, it's ridiculous for a start. But I think he, you know, has bitten off more than he could chew in attacking Joe Biden for his age, because actually the Democrats finally made a decision to tackle the situation. Joe Biden stood down, Kamala Harris is in there, and suddenly it's game on. And I think some of this vitriol that's coming out is a reflection of Trump and his team really quite worried about how close this election is going to be. It is disgusting, some of the things he said. I mean, that comment there, Rob, where he said she's only just discovered she's black, that was in front of an audience of black journalists, for God's sake.
Well, some people would say at least he went and into the lion's den, and at least he's given an interview. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, we've hardly heard anything from her, right?
Yeah, but that is a classic sort of political tactic. I mean, we've seen it in UK elections as well, where politicians...
That kind of race
the resistance the resistance to give interviews and to stand up to scrutiny. I don't think it's a good tactic, but it is something that is used. I do think that Donald Trump is just bonkers. I also, he's like, oh, she played up the Indian. Well, if that's the case, then maybe there's hope for me for the American presidential race.
Well, we've got coverage of the debate on Tuesday. It's going to be absolutely fascinating, as you described, Caroline. Game on. And congratulations, by the way, today you've just got a fellowship from the University of...
I'm getting an honorary fellowship from the Royal College of GPs, and I'll be up in Liverpool later on today to get it.
How wonderful. Congratulations. Congratulations. Thank you both of you.